Are you looking for a partner that creates stunning game art and provides seamless co-development? Mineloader Studios has over 20 years of experience creating breathtaking visuals and building worlds for top-tier games. Let's bring your vision to life. Visit mineloader.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to XDS Podcast. My name is David Lam. I'm executive producer at Netease Games. I'm a Vancouverite, now living in LA, beautiful, sunny LA. We are recording live on site at XDS24 in Vancouver. I couldn't be more excited to be sitting down with Nicole West, co-founder and head of operations at West Studio, to talk about a presentation, People Power, how an emphasis on individuals builds stronger collaborations, which we were lucky enough to see live yesterday at the summit. This presentation spoke to me in terms of how Nicole and Tyler run their studio with a lot of integrity and treat people how they want to be treated, and to have a sustainable business that will last decades, if not forever. Before we dig into that, let's roll and listen to the main stage talk.
Thank you so much for the introduction. David kind of understated how much he contributed to this presentation. He really pushed me to explore topics a little more deeply than I maybe naturally would have. So thank you for all your help and advice. I really appreciate it. Welcome to my presentation, People Power, an emphasis on individuals build stronger collaborations. Here's a quick overview of how we will spend our time together today. We'll go over the presentation goals. I'll tell you a little bit about me just because some of it will relate back to parts of the presentation later. We'll talk about demystifying people, developing ethos, curiosity-driven solutions, which is a nice way of saying how to solve problems when they occur. And then we'll have time for questions from you all. All right, let's jump in. So the goal of this presentation is to provide data and experience to demystify what makes creative teams perform at their best, highest by focusing on people as individuals. You'll have the knowledge to construct your own philosophy, to logically make consistent decisions that empower you and those that you interact with. So a little bit about my background. I know David spoke about it briefly, but I started working in video games the way that everyone else starts working in video games, by working at a museum. And I worked at LACMA, and there which is the LA County Museum of Art, and I helped put on an event at E3 called Into the Pixel, which celebrated the art of video games, which was a revolutionary idea at that time, which is bizarre to say today. One reason I just wanted to highlight my background a little bit is that I had the pleasure of actually working on both the vendor and the client side over the course of my career. Additionally, I got to work in a lot of different mediums in terms of storytelling, video games. I also got to work in television animation and feature animation. And so all of that kind of led me to the philosophies that I'm presenting today. Something that sets me a little bit apart, which David mentioned, is that I am deeply entrenched with an artist, i.e. we're married and we own a business together and we have a baby and a dog together. So most producers, like operation-focused, kind of more analytical people, don't live so deeply with an artist, I think. It happens every once in a while. But so I've been really, besides our time together, I've spent the bulk of my career developing artists and supporting creative talent, and that's been my passion. I love art. I think it's the coolest thing on the planet. I fell in love with art when I was pretty young, just going to fine art museums, and I discovered that the best way to work with art these days is to work with commercial artists who are alive. It's much more fun to work with living artists than dead ones, in my opinion. So as David mentioned, I have two jobs right now. I work as a professor at USC in the animation department, and then I also help run West Studio. So after working at a museum and kind of putting on some events, I got to work on video games through localization and QA. This was amazing because I got to work with different publishers and developers. And during that period of time, I got to see kind of what worked and what didn't, because there were a ton of different people. And we were integrated at the end of a project typically. So we got to see firsthand what worked and what really, didn't work. And then at EA, where I met David and Chris Wren, I worked on a free-to-play AAA game called Command & Conquer with a distributed art team in Los Angeles in China. I went to the very first XDS. It was really lovely. But unfortunately, the project I was working on was canceled in beta just a few months later. But there's no known correlation with attending XDS and having your project canceled, so don't worry. And at DreamWorks Feature, I manage effects artists, matte painters, and surfacers across all of the feature films in 2 locations. And then I moved over to the TV department, which, as you guys are probably aware, because you probably, watch a lot of things on subscription, video on demand providers. And so I got to kind of sit through the very beginning phases of getting a lot of analytics back from Netflix and seeing what consumers were doing and watching things pivot a lot. At DWA, there was no house style, so that was really interesting in the sense that there were 2D shows, 3D shows, hybrid shows, there were story-driven shows, there were script-driven shows, and the target audiences were a variety of age groups. Additionally, there was tons of different genres. So as someone who managed all of the talent at this studio, it was a really big challenge because people had a really big breadth of skill sets. As David mentioned, I helped co-found West Studio. This was in 2008 with my husband, Tyler West, who's the creative director. He was a concept artist for EALA and Redwood Shores, and then NCSoft, and he wanted more diverse work and wanted to be able to work on different projects and not just one game for 2 to 4 years. But he also saw that there was kind of a need for bespoke concept art projects in the sense that sometimes the studios would take artists from one project and then move them on to another project where their skill set and talents weren't necessarily aligned. And so our studio's concept is to understand the vision and aspirations of a project and then build the team around that. We attach an ideal art director and then source artists from all over the world to have a dream team for each project. So we've been lucky to have this work for us for the past 16 years. Like DreamWorks, we do not have a house style. We create bespoke teams for each project. We're really committed to creating beautiful worlds, and we're super honored and fortunate to have been able to have the best clients, many of them who are here today, and we've got to work on a ton of different projects. All right, so now that you know a bit about me and why I'm speaking on this topic, let's move into this main content, starting with demystifying people. So I love this quote from Ben Okri: "The most authentic thing about us is our capacity to create, to overcome, to endure, to transform, and to love, and to be greater than our suffering." So typically, it is a leader's intention to deliver their project, whatever the medium, whatever they're making, on time and on budget at the highest quality level possible. In this sense, the external development relationship and the client and the vendor are in alignment in terms of their goals. They both want to be successful and they want their teams to be successful. So why do things go off track? What happens? The biggest variable here is that people can be unpredictable. And so the process of humans creating really anything can be also unpredictable. But it's also what sometimes looks like magic when you see, experience, play an extraordinary human creation. We as humans are capable of taking risks, introducing innovation, and we're capable of profound collaborations. Typically, our ability to see people as humans and individuals erodes when stress, failure, or breakdowns exceed our capacity. And capacity is completely individual. We all have different capacity thresholds, and they're constantly in flux. So it's easy in these moments to reduce the person as the problem or the other team as the problem or just doing that thing that they do because it allows us some temporary relief from complex feelings that we might have about failure. It helps us categorize, regain the idea of control, and maybe solve the problem. So recognizing this tendency is the inroad to regaining our humanity and developing strategic instead of reactionary solutions. Trust me that I have run into some very complex challenges in people over the course of my career, which I'm sure you all have as well. So in these moments, I like to break things down to their most simplistic nature to demystify and understand a concept or an experience. So every person is just like you. You were born, and I hate to tell you, but you will die. You need food, shelter, sleep, clothing. You have a community of family and friends, or maybe friends who are family if you don't really like your family. You feel love, fear, anger, and a multitude of human emotions. Additionally, a core human emotional need is to feel valued and valuable. This reflection, taking a moment to reflect on this, allows a fast track into empathy. With this in mind, we'll move on into ethos. And I really liked this quote from Janet Morris, who's an American fantasy and sci-fi author. No ethos pursued without thought or mercy is ethical. I know people talk about integrity and accountability all of the time, but I don't think that their importance as a leader can be overstated. As I mentioned, I like reflecting on the most simplistic understanding of a concept, and so here's some definitions for you. In the definition of integrity, I really love that part of it is the firm adherence to a code, especially moral or artistic values. So, and then accountability, the state of being, the quality or state of being accountable, especially an obligation or willingness to accept responsibility or to account for one's actions. Or how I see it, to acknowledge when you haven't done what you said you would do, and to own when you've fallen short as a leader. I have a quick example that I want to provide when I fell short as a leader. I was managing, all of the artists at DreamWorks Animation Television, and I needed someone to go to a school to give a talk. And so I had this artist that went to that school, so I called him into my office and I asked him, "Will you go?" And he said no. And I said, "Why? Are you afraid?" And it was a really cruel thing to say because he was someone who was very, very introverted. And it was something that was like a bit out of character for me because I'm not a naturally unkind person. But I realized after he left, the reason I did that is I wanted him to solve a problem for me. I was overwhelmed and I was stressed. And so I was like, I kind of said something that I didn't really mean. And I think he probably actually really was scared, which made it even worse. So I thought about that for a minute, and a day or two later, I called him back into my office and I said, "You know what? I'm really sorry what I said to you. It was inappropriate. It was uncalled for, and it was unprofessional." And I didn't have an excuse because there really wasn't an excuse, other than the fact that I'm a human and I make mistakes too. So all right. So many people believe that capitalistic pursuits are at odds or incongruent for what is best for individuals. And I tend to disagree in certain circumstances. So if ethos are thoughtfully constructed and that ethos aren't singularly focused on maximizing profits. So maximizing profits above all else, I don't even think is compatible with the highest quality creative products. Why is bigger always better? Why is more and more profit, i.e. more money, always better for business? At companies that I worked for before, I've seen large corporations look at the quarterly profits as the only metric, or what seemed to be the only metric, to the detriment to the people working for them, in the sense that they weren't interested in investing them in anymore. And they are also we're not investing in innovation. I had at DreamWorks mentioned we should start testing out game engines about 6 years ago, because although there would be an initial investment, over time, all the CG shows would have a lot of savings and higher quality. But because of the quarterly profit desires, that wasn't something that they could do at that time. So over time, not investing, I think, actually really hurts companies when we're so focused on profits. And the other thing is that high-quality products are made by high-quality individuals. So investing in those individuals is a requirement to make sure that they're engaged and fulfilled and that they're doing their very best work. So at West Studio, one thing that I wanted to mention, because in my discussion with David, he was like, hey, that's really interesting. You should talk about that. I had said it just casually. But we actually pay all of our artists, no matter where they're located in the world, the same rate. So an artist in France gets paid the same rate as an artist in Egypt or California. Obviously, some of the structures around that has to change for legal reasons. But our philosophy is that we're hiring talented artists to do quality work, and it doesn't really matter where they're located in the world. And this provides opportunities for global talent, and it also allows for more creative voices at the table, which only increases the quality of our work. We also don't take all the work that comes our way. There might be a reason we don't do it around bandwidth, or the nature of the work might actually not align with the overall ethos of our company. And while it might be profitable, it wouldn't benefit our art directors and artists in the studio, and they may become disengaged. The last time, the other example that I have is we've been approached by governments where they're starting to build, film and game industries in their country, but their countries have major human rights violations. And so in those instances, we'll sit down with the whole team and say, is it okay if we take this work? Like, here's the pros and the cons. The pros are there's going to be more diverse ideas introduced to the countries this way, but at the same time, we're going to be making money from a country that maybe isn't following the same way we want people to be treated. Ethos should integrate the benefit to the individuals and not just financially. So it's not just about giving people more money, but the whole person. Professional growth is good for the company, and it's also good for the individual. As a natural cynic, I know that this sounds idealistic and altruistic. So let's look over a few examples in practice. So the first example, because I think people probably here work for both large companies, medium companies, small companies, maybe startups. So I'm going to give an example from both a large company, but then also from a small company as well that could be applied to a medium-sized company. So in a larger business, these opportunities are not as obvious, and they might need to be found. It's definitely harder to find them. But this example is from DreamWorks TV. So I want to talk to you about the initial investment. So the initial investment was a small team to meet with and work with existing talent. So it was 3 people, including me. We developed an internal portfolio system. Not everyone that we managed was creative. There were people who were producers. There were people who, it was really like the whole pipeline that we serviced. And so it was everyone at the studio. So we did also have an internal tracking system for all of the talent in the studio. We managed about 600 internal employees. So what we would do is we'd learn their backgrounds, their skills, and their aspirations. Our team was looking at their show's end date and another show's start date to see if we could transfer them from one show to another, so that when they're done with their show, they just don't leave the studio automatically, but that we could potentially retain them. And so we'd negotiate end and start dates with both shows on either end, and we also negotiated rates with employees. In addition to that, we developed the philosophies and the rule sets of how these transitions would take place, and we had the really fun job of enforcing those rules. So we had about 20 shows at any given time running, and then there's somewhere between 40 to 70 in development. So that's the development thing can get confusing between games and TV animation, but development's the place where basically an idea is kind of launched, and so that's where the pitches come from, basically. So we also identified emergent talent and readied them for promotional opportunities, and then we had programming on the other end if they were promoted. So we had art director training, showrunner training. So if they're going from a position where they were a contributor from a content standpoint, and then they're going into a position where they're actually going to be managing people, that they had the tools and support to do that. When we did this, we had a visible demonstration of the company investing in talent. It was seen by everyone as people were getting promoted. TV shows move really fast, and they cannot fall behind. They actually kind of run similarly to a game sprint. So they're normally like 3 weeks. They're in a boarding process, and there's another 3 weeks. So you have to stay on track. If someone's sick, if they have to do a rewrite, you actually can't extend the schedule at all. So there's a lot of emergent staffing needs. And so what we would do is we would fill emerging needs with existing talent. And the reason that that really worked is, first of all, existing talent had the opportunity to get overtime, which most people like to get paid overtime because it's time and a half in the state of California. So they're like, this is awesome. And they also get more contributions to their union, which is great for them as well. But in addition to that, it allowed them to go to another team and try out being on their team. And also from an artistic standpoint, would give them the opportunity to have more assets in their internal portfolio so that they had more diversity. They could try something that they maybe didn't already have in their portfolio. And doing this kind of internal staffing was obviously much faster, and it was cheaper than an outside hire because we're not utilizing any of the internal resources like HR, recruiting, IT. None of those people are involved in these instances. The same thing happens actually when we would just move someone from one show to another, because onboarding is incredibly expensive. And so we already had known talent that was getting moved from one show to another. This investment overall was priceless. The system naturally built in more diverse leaders since we were investing in growing existing talent. And even if we couldn't place talent at the end of their show, because sometimes something wouldn't line up, they felt that they had more control over their future. We were very transparent about their end dates. We were very transparent about what was available. And they went out and advocated for themselves. They built their internal portfolio. So they felt like they had control, and they were more likely to return in the future. So now we're going to move on to an example of a small business, West Studio. Though, as I mentioned, I think it could apply to a medium-sized business where you maybe, if you have more ownership, perhaps you're the owner of a department or a division. So how did we develop our ethos at West Studio? I think the best place to really harness knowledge is in failure. And so we experienced the other side, both Tyler and I. We both went through several layoffs from different companies, and I actually was very unfortunate in the sense that I was a layer offer at DreamWorks feature, and it was pretty traumatizing. Those experiences really showed us the interactions that companies have with individuals and how they can be a place where someone grows as a person or someone can potentially be harmed. When I was at DreamWorks Feature, Jeffrey Katzenberg had said to the entire studio, I want you to start your career here and end your career here. And I think that is an idea that's not terrible if you continue to grow and invest your talent. You can't let people atrophy somewhere. And I think that's really hard to do, by the way, to work somewhere 30 years and not have any change and to continue to grow. I don't think most people will be that invested in their own growth because they'll get really comfortable. But what I saw was that a lot of people had been there for 15 to 20 years, and they actually couldn't really They no longer had a portfolio that they were investing in their time in. They weren't like learning off-the-box tools or off-the-shelf tools anymore. And unfortunately, that really led to them not being able to stay in the industry or even transition to an alike industry. And that's really tragic to see someone who loves what they do but not be able to remain in an industry that they're passionate about. So something that we really ask ourselves as we built our business, and really anything that I ever do in my career, is how do you give career ownership to your talent and support them in investing and growing themselves? Like, that is, I think, the most important thing that anyone can do as a manager or a leader. So for us, it was by necessity. We're a lean team. Everyone is massively important, and they are truly what makes us great. If we lost one part of our overall pie, we're not the same. So we really invest in them, and we don't take shortcuts in investing. The investment is real. We really get to know who they are and what makes them tick, and how to support them individually. One of the big areas that we invest in is training to ensure everyone's on the same page. So I'm going to show you some quick examples. I feel like this stuff feels obvious, but I've started so many jobs where I had no training, and the expectations were really unclear. So setting someone up for success before they begin working is super important. And I know that this can feel daunting if you're in a small or medium-sized business, but you really can do this. It's not too much work. So we like to create training plans both in the macro and the micro, and this is kind of a macro example of the high-level expectations of an art production manager. We're super clear about what we expect them to do and when we expect them to do it. So we say very clearly, in the third month, you now own your jobs. You now own your job in all of the tasks. Before that period of time, you don't fully own them. We're here to support you. We're here to get you on board. But we also want to give enough support so that they truly and deeply understand what their role is. So you saw the macro, and this is with the expectations with the training plan, but this is how we kind of get there. So we break down all the key areas of learning, we prioritize them, and then we identify the ideal teacher within the studio, and we schedule out those sessions. So a lot of people invest in tools and systems, which is great if you have those resources to train someone, but you really just have to thoughtfully explore how to set someone up for success. So we want to do whatever we can do to make sure every member of our team knows how much we value them, and we try to show that in every action every single day. Sometimes we fail, but that is our goal, is that we always want them to know how much we appreciate what they're contributing and how much it means. So every choice we make really relates back to our ethos. And this includes when someone asks for more pay. So we preemptively like to monitor everyone's salary and when they might be due for an increase, and kind of have those conversations before they bring them up. A lot of times when employees bring up pay increases, they're already dissatisfied. That normally comes from a place of already dissatisfaction. So instead of proactively, you're sort of reactively solving something. So in these times, we consider, is this fair across the team? Does it create an imbalance of equity? Does it make sense from the business side? Or does it introduce some risk of someone being too expensive if the market changes, which I think we've all seen a lot of market changes over the last few years. And it's really, I think the most important part is when someone asks for an increase is to really take in the information and take some time to go do the research. Look at their history. Look at the history of other people. You know, at DreamWorks TV, I actually did a leveling across the entire studio of people's pay by what they did, because there's so much natural imbalance that just occurs due to implicit bias, due to just circumstances when they may have joined their industry. So it's really important to be thoughtful. And so when you go back to the person, the answer doesn't have to be yes, but it needs to be thoughtful and it needs to be strategic in why it's yes or no. The why yes is as important as the why no. The other thing you can explore, what are small things, if you can't always give people more and more money, it's not sustainable or possible, but what can you do to make someone's life better? What can you provide? So for us, we're always curious about people's interests, and especially if it can relate back to what they do, it's fun for all of us. So one of our art directors, David Lam, he's an amazing hard surface guy. Like, go look at his stuff. He's brilliant. And he had mentioned he really wanted to go to JPL. And so I was like, that's something I can do. Like, I can get us a private tour of JPL. So we all went. We all learned so much and nerded out, bought everything in the gift shop. And we really had like a fantastic time. But it's like investing back in him. For him, it really meant something. But for us, the rest of us, we enjoyed, and we are actually able to have those conversations. Tyler loves Miyazaki a lot. And so we made another occasion to all go see the Miyazaki show at the Academy Museum. And we all walked away with a lot of inspiration, but also like a shared experience of seeing brilliance on a wall, which is pretty awesome. And I got to go back to LACMA, where I started my career. So the other thing that is a huge part of our culture is celebrating wins. This is something that we are passionate about. I don't know how we got so passionate about it, but we're super passionate about it. So there's two main tools where we do this. We have a weekly team meeting where we look at all of the art across the studio together, and in that space we're able to review and see things that are just like someone knocked it out of the park, and we're like, oh, how'd they do that? There's a particular artist that we really love, and every time we see her work, she'll do these drawings that are like oh my God, you can't even imagine. And she does like 2 in a day. And we're like, is she a clone? Does she have a twin sister who's drawing next to her? Like, what's happening? So we get really inspired by the work in our studio. It also allows a place for open conversation about what's not potentially going well, or artists that haven't really hit it. Sometimes it's an artist that someone else on the team's worked with, and they might have some inroads or insights on how to resolve them. And we're able to collaborate on staffing and quality topics. The other space is Slack. So we love Slack, but we kind of have a dedicated channel just to like being cheerleaders and hype people for each other, which is called Random. We like to celebrate team milestones, birthdays, studio anniversaries, but we really love to talk about people's outside passions, their pets, and family moments. We love this in the studio. Like it genuinely makes each other's day. Tyler and I also hand write and mail, like snail mail, cards to employees for their anniversary every year, though honestly they go out late. That's my fault. All right, moving on to curiosity-driven solutions. Who doesn't love some Albert Einstein? I have no special talents. I'm only passionately curious. So in external development, the relationship shortcomings between two groups are often blamed on tribalism or being beholden to your own group. I had done some research to kind of explore tribalism a little bit more, because I think we hear in politics and a lot of other spaces in the world, people love to blame things on tribalism. Like it's not their fault, they're just like beholden to their group. There's some recent research on tribalism that indicates that the biological basis of the classification process show that specific in-group and out-group categories are not hardwired. So the idea of tribalism isn't hardwired in us, though we've been kind of led to believe that. Rather, our neurobiology reflects a highly flexible system that can represent itself in others. Additionally, how us and them are divided can shift quickly and dynamically. And I find this like very encouraging, because just like unconscious bias, being conscious of these tendencies allows the inroad to making choices outside of the tendency. So I'm not sure about all of you, but I'm a really big true crime fan, like podcasts, all the TV shows, especially the British ones, might have a small addiction to it. So I try to harness my inner Sherlock Holmes, but really I'm kind of like a bumbling Watson when something goes awry. First, I will acknowledge my totally human response to jump to conclusions and probably be pissed off. And then I try to get to an emotionally neutral place. Personally, I find this more difficult with people who I find triggering, which is normally someone who is somewhat like a frustrating person in my family or my spouse's family. Like that's normally who really, really triggers me. It's not their fault. So in those instances when I know I'm being triggered, I ask for outside party to weigh in of someone who I trust and know will be honest with me about the fact, like they'll tell me, oh, this is what you feel like this happened, but this is actually what happened. So once I kind of get to that place, what I like to do is ask questions. So enter conversations with authentic curiosity. Do not fake the curiosity. I think there's a really terrible slippery slope to passive aggressiveness. You're like, oh, why'd you do that? No, really? Watch out for it. Listening is the place where you potentially have the most to gain. Listen for areas where you perhaps didn't provide the other person or the team what they needed. If there's feedback where you fell short, find out more. Don't be defensive. It's very hard to do that, but this is like how you actually solve the problem. This is the fastest way to solve problems generally. If you don't understand something, ask for examples, get more information. Sometimes people in these situations will get really sidetracked and not want to talk about the main thing, so put them back on track. Note the areas where changes can be made. I suggest capturing the conversation and next step via email to ensure, or whatever communication tool you are using to ensure that you're aligned on expectations and make sure you follow up. I know that there are many different methodologies, postmortems, one-on-ones, check-ins, and here are my thoughts. So postmortems, I think they can highlight training and knowledge shortcomings, but sometimes I've seen analytics take over. One-on-ones and regular check-ins, I think a big mistake in this space is that they require real thought and preparation and energy. Otherwise, they're a massive time waster, in my opinion. So I think besides the tool or whatever methodology you use to communicate, the most important thing about feedback is alignment, documentation, and follow-up. And make sure that whatever tool you use doesn't hinder the authenticity of the conversation. So expectations. Expectations are unbelievably important. I feel like this is the biggest missed thing that I see like in life in general, not just in a professional setting. What you think you told someone to do versus what they heard. I don't know if you guys have had a spouse clean or do something for you and you're like, okay, that's your version of that, got it. Define what you want and what you expect to get out of the collaboration. It's okay to get really detailed here. Not so detailed that someone's not gonna read it, too long didn't read, but just get detailed enough that it's very clear. Consider your collaborators' experience level and skill. Creating documentation, putting together clear information sets up both sides for successful relationships. Do you both speak the same language of what success looks like? So when I managed a team in EA Shanghai, one of the things that I noticed was that art terminology, even in English language with native-born English language speakers, actually wasn't always on the same plane. So if you add the cultural difference of someone not having English be their first language, it becomes very complicated. And so I really recommend in those instances to create a glossary or something that helps you unify what different art terms mean. So I have a document that we send to all artists who work with us. I just have a couple pages just as an example for West Studio. So with this, we kind of just immediately share the goals and the vision of the studio. We use very basic language. We're fortunate to work with artists all over the world. We create documentation that assumes that English is not the artist's first language. And then we're really upfront. So there's a bunch more pages in this, but I don't want to bore you guys with it all. But we're just really upfront about the different areas where they'll be interacting with us. So it's as clear as possible. So invoicing, how files should be set up, file naming conventions, communication, like if issues come up, who they should reach out to, and that we're here to support them do their best work. And the nice thing about having it in a PDF versus like an email or something like that, they can take their own time. If English isn't their first language, then they can use a translation tool afterwards. So when clear expectations are set up in advance, it can make discovering issues and the nature of the issues much easier. One of the biggest challenges, in my opinion, to determine if you should continue investing in an individual or a partner is should you continue or should you not continue? And I think this becomes very emotional because you may have picked that partner, you may have made that choice, you may be heavily invested at this point, but it feels like maybe you can't salvage the situation. But I think if you set upfront clear expectation, it gets a lot easier to figure out if improvements or change can be made. And also helps to identify if the fault might lay with you, like if there's somewhere where you might have fallen short. So I like to break it into two categories for myself. It's skill or will, or sometimes both. So skill is really, do they have the ability to do what is expected of them? Where are they at now versus where they need to be? And what are the resources required to get them there? And like, what's the state of your business? Does it make sense to invest to get them to where they need to be? I think that will is a really tough one because you can really not make anyone want to do something. So when someone doesn't have the will to do something, I think that becomes a lot more challenging, but in some ways easier because you're like, okay, they have the skills, but they just don't want to do it. So, okay. So I use this framework whenever I make tough decisions. It ensures that the decisions being made are both in the best interest of the business and the individual. For example, like if an individual can't do the work, keeping them in that job longer and they don't have the capacity or the ability to get there, keeping them in that job longer only hurts them and everyone around them. I think, everyone has to be held accountable and they have to do the work that they were hired to do. So communication, being clear, honest, and transparent in tough conversations is hard. I like to remind myself that less is more. Clarity is the most fair and right thing to provide to another person in difficult conversations. Thus, I love this quote, when there are tough messages to deliver, It is important to communicate the good and the bad. Respect people by delivering the truth. So I like to remind myself that returning to ethos is the best place to go when the going gets tough. So I kind of see it as a cycle, like something happens, and you're like, oh God, like things were going well, this is terrible. Take a minute, let it be terrible, and then slow down and think. Get grounded in your ethos before responding. If you're triggered, consult with another party who provides sound advice. I also like to go outside, like for a minute, take a breath of air, maybe take a little walk. And then your response should be in alignment with your ethos, which is in the best interest of the business and in the individual or individuals. We'll now wrap up things by returning to my goals of the presentation. In my experience and from research, creative teams thrive when we consider the individuals. Set them up for success. Encourage and invest in them. Lead with integrity and accountability. I know that this philosophy saves businesses money in the long run. There's less attrition, i.e. costs for recruiting, HR, and onboarding. There's less problems to triage. Employees are more invested in their work. There's less wasted time, which we all know time is money. In addition to that, and why I was motivated to come and give this talk today, is that people are happier and more fulfilled at work. They feel seen, they feel valued, they grow. As a leader, I am not sure that there is any greater satisfaction than seeing people who you've invested in flourish and live good lives, both professionally and personally.
Okay, welcome back everyone to the XDS podcast. We just heard from Nicole, co-founder and head of operations at West Studio. I was so impressed with how Nicole was able to present. She's a very natural presenter. You can tell she's a professor. Like, I just could feel it. Like, I had something to learn there. And the way that I think it came across, one thing that we were talking about was landing the plane. And I think you did.
Thank
you really
you.
did.
Yeah.
One comment that you made in the past was about your pilot's license. So maybe we can start that as an icebreaker. Tell us a little bit about you getting your license.
Oh, yeah. So my grandfather was a pilot in World War II and the Korean War. And when I was a little girl, I always wanted to be a pilot. And I thought, I'll be a pilot. And then that path wasn't really a path for women when I was a little girl. And so as I got older, I was like, I'm still going to be a pilot, just not professionally. And so I got my pilot's license in Van Nuys, and it's so much fun. And I was telling you, taking off is like the biggest thrill in the world, and the hardest thing to do is to land a plane. So,
well, you landed it on your presentation.
Thank you.
So happy.
With your help.
Oh, come on. Come on. I was there with a parachute. Don't cut that. All right. Let's go into the actual scripted questions here.
Okay.
Okay. First one. What inspired you to want to put this presentation together?
Yeah, so about 2 years ago, I had an opportunity to speak with a group of African filmmakers who make animated films, and it was a master class on people. And so I put that presentation together, and I thought it was kind of like obvious and maybe not very interesting, and they loved it. And I actually had this conference was co-sponsored by Disney, and one of their execs reached out and was like, this is amazing, like I've never heard this before. And so I'm not really a person who loves a lot of attention, but I thought I had maybe something to say from all of the experiences I've had in my career that might be helpful to someone else.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I remember it's funny how our circles kind of have overlapped over the years.
Oh, so many times.
When you mentioned this, because when you told me about this when we first had our first meeting, I instantly thought Triggerfish.
Yeah.
And that was the place.
That was the place, yeah.
It's so weird.
Yeah. The Kazazimoto is the series of African creators that I was teaching the masterclass for. So.
Did you actually go to South Africa?
No, this was in COVID, so this is early 2022. So I actually didn't get to go to, and the filmmakers for that program are actually from all over the continent of Africa, from like Egypt, from Ghana, all over the place. And so we were actually on Zoom, but the coolest thing happened, which is they got to come out really close to the release, and I got to meet them all.
Oh, wonderful.
And I got to do a day intensive with them. And so it was so cool. It's like one of the highlights of my career.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you know, I hold a record of being the only EA person to ever visit Triggerfish in South Africa.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
I know.
Yeah, I haven't been there. I really, really want to go.
I think they have a plaque or something on the wall with my face on it.
In your face?
Yeah.
It's like in gold, maybe?
Do not let this man in. I think that's what it says. Okay. Next question. You ready?
Yes.
Okay. So what made you feel you were the right person to uniquely deliver this message?
Yeah, I think I talk about it a little bit in my speech, but I think the background that I have I think they use the term transmedia. I don't like using it, but having worked in a bunch of different fields and content creation and working with a ton of different types of creatives, and then being married to a creative, and we got together when we were 21, so we were like little puppies. So it was, it's been a lifetime kind of seeing the different experiences he's had as well, and all of our friends are mostly creative. So I felt like for someone who is a producer type who really deeply loves and wants the product to be the best product it could be, I thought I maybe had something to say about how to encourage people, how to set them up for success to make the best product possible. Because I've seen really dysfunctional teams and I've seen really functional teams. And I think sometimes it just feels like there's no real rhyme or reason, but I do think there are some core things you can do to set them up for success and to have them be really functional. Because those experiences stick with people in the long term. So the more positive we can have with each other, it affects all the parts of our lives, like our kids, if we're having a lot of stress at work, our kids, if you have kids, or your dog or your cat. I just read an article that your dog absorbs so much of your stress and knows when you're stressed. And so be thoughtful about your dogs. Don't get too stressed at work. But I just think it's like we're people and it's all of us, and so the more we can do to work with each other in ways that are supportive and help us grow is better.
What do you think most business owners, teams, get wrong in building a company?
I don't know. I think it'd be hard to know exactly like what makes it not great, but I think the thing that I tell people a lot of times, especially I have some, because I teach, I have some students who want to start their own studios, and so I consult with them about that and do some mentorship. And so I think understanding your purpose is the most important part before you do anything. And I think if you don't have a purpose and it's just about making money, I think it's going to be harder and have a much more challenging time having legs. So for me, what I tell people is like, look for an opening. And especially with my younger students, like they see things that I don't see. And I'm like, your advantage is that you know more about the world and relevant things in the world than I do anymore. And so you're going to see gaps that I don't see. And those gaps are where there's opportunity. And so I think just really thinking about how you can add value and how you can create something that really has a purpose and gives something to someone that you believe in. Because just like anything, if you're not really into it, I think it becomes a job in a really bad way. And I think owning a small business or owning your own business, there's so much unfun things you have to do already. And if you don't really love what you're doing or the people you're working with, I would find it, I don't know why you would do that. So
fast forward 10 years. Where will the industry be? What is different? What remains true? Where will you be?
I think like one of the big reasons that I'm currently teaching at the university level is I think that this is a really important time in terms of technology. And I think storytellers are going to have opportunities that we can't fathom due to the development of technology, even over the course of our careers in our childhoods to now. So I think I don't know what it's going to look like, but I think it's going to give us, I think the things I do know and that I'm really passionate and excited about, first of all, global voices. People are starting to see themselves on screens and games and animation all over the place. And we're starting to see other people's realities, their lives, like what it's like to live in their world. And I just absolutely love that. And I think that's only going to continue to grow. And then I think and that has to do with technology because we're connected in a different way than we were ever before. And the second part is that I think, with real-time rendering, nonlinear, linear storytelling is going to change. And I don't exactly understand what it's going to look like because I'm not that smart, but I'm excited for that future, and I'm excited for our younger generation of storytellers, and encouraging them is the thing that I think I'll be doing in 10 years, and then we'll still be running the studio. But those are kind of the two things I think I will be doing then. But it's hard to imagine what that looks like. But I think it's exciting.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, I'm getting the wrap-up signal, so I better follow it. That's all we have for today. I want to thank Nicole for joining us, and XDS is so busy, and we appreciate your time and insight and for coming in and contributing to this. So
Thank you.
Thank you. It was wonderful to partner with you.
You too. Thank you so much for everything.